On what seemed like an ordinary night, Lucas found himself patrolling the empty halls of Randall Park Mall in Ohio. Once bustling with life, the mall now stood silent, a monument to a bygone era of retail glory. Lucas, a security guard, had been assigned to oversee the mall's final hours before its planned demolition. It was a task he met with a mix of reluctance and curiosity. As Lucas made his rounds through the dark, echoing corridors, the weight of the mall's history pressed heavily upon him. Randall Park Mall had just been a staple of the community, a place where memories were made. Now it was just shadows and silence, or so he thought. The first oddity of the night was a cup of coffee, steam rising from it still, sitting on a table in the food court. Lucas paused, the hair on the back of his neck standing up. The food court hadn't served a meal in years. Curious and unnerved, he pressed on, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Then came the footprints, fresh in the dust that coated the floor, leading Lucas down corridors he hadn't walked in years. They led him to the arcade, where the faint sound of laughter and the electronic beeps of games long silent seemed to fill the air. But the arcade was empty, the games powered off and covered in dust. Feeling a mix of fear and determination, Lucas decided to follow these mysterious signs. He came across a store that had been his favorite as a teenager, now just an empty shell. Inside, he found more anomalies. A pile of clothes that looked recently worn, and a collection of photographs scattered on the counter. The photos showed the mall in its prime, bustling with people, and among them was a picture of Lucas himself, a teenager with his friends, laughing and unaware of the mall's eventual fate. The night's strangeness escalated when Lucas discovered a hidden door behind a false wall in the back of an old department store. The door led to an underground network of tunnels he never knew existed. His heart raced as he explored, finding evidence of recent habitation, sleeping bags, food wrappers, and more photos, these taken from a distance, capturing him on his rounds. Lucas realized he wasn't alone. Someone or some group had been living in the mall, watching him, perhaps for weeks. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He hurried back to the surface, intent on leaving and calling the police. But before he could, he heard a crash, a sound of metal echoing through the empty mall. He rushed toward the noise, finding a makeshift barrier that had been knocked over, revealing a room filled with memorabilia from the mall's past. It was a shrine to a lost era, but among the nostalgia was a darker note, a journal detailing the mall's last days and a plan to preserve its memory by any means necessary. Lucas's presence had disturbed someone's twisted tribute to the Randall Park Mall. He heard footsteps approaching, fast and determined. Panicking, Lucas made a break for the nearest exit, the sound of his pursuer close behind. Bursting out into the night air, Lucas didn't stop running until he reached the safety of his car. He looked back behind once, half expecting to see a figure emerge from a dark entrance of the mall, but there was only silence. The police investigation the next day turned up little. The underground tunnels were empty, the shrine and the journal also gone. It was as if Lucas had imagined the whole thing, but he knew what he had seen and felt. The mall might have been abandoned, but it wasn't dead. It held secrets and memories, some of them dark enough to want to remain hidden. Lucas never returned to Randall Park Mall. He quit his job the next day, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The mall was demolished shortly after, and its mysteries buried under the rubble. But Lucas often finds himself lying awake at night, wondering about the hidden life of places forgotten by time and the lengths some might want to go to preserve them. He sometimes drives past the site where the mall once stood, a part of him searching for a sign of the hidden watchers and the guardians of Randall Park's legacy. But all that remains is an empty lot, the unsettling feeling that some stories are better left untold. Walking into that small mall for what I knew would be the last time was like stepping into a different world. It was a place I used to know, a place where I'd spent countless hours as a kid, running from store to store, my eyes wide with the sheer possibility of it all. But now, it was in its last month, a shell of its former self, with only 2 stores left clinging to life amid the sprawling emptiness. The first store that caught my eye was unlike anything I'd expected to find in this ghost town of a mall. It was a sword and fantasy weapons store, and it looked like the owner, this dude who seemed to have just one day turned his personal collection into a makeshift shop, had gotten the floor space on the cheap. The place was packed with all sorts of cool stuff, swords, axes, and even some items that looked like they'd been plucked right out of a fantasy novel, but the vibe was off. The guy that was running it was like a total nerd, for sure, but he was also pretty rude. He didn't seem at all interested in actually selling anything. His attention was more on the collection than on any other potential customers. Signs were everywhere warning about breaking items and having to buy them. A clear message that browsing was tolerated but not exactly welcome. It was weird, but not exactly scary. Just off. Then there was the other store, and man, was it a trip. It was the kind of place that seemed to sell nothing but only random trashy bullshit. Knickknacks, odd pieces of this and that, stuff you couldn't imagine anyone actually buying. But there, among the clutter, was a case that caught my eye. Inside were knives, lighters, brass knuckles, wallets, and all sorts of other items. But it wasn't the items themselves that gave me the pause. It was the fact that they all bore the swastika of Nazi Germany. Seeing those symbols there, in the forgotten corner of the dying mall, sent a chill down my spine. I've never been one to shy away from confrontation, and the old man behind the counter, the one responsible for this display, seemed like he was about to get a piece of my mind. But then I really looked at him. The guy was old, really old, and he looked like he'd had a rough go of it. His health seemed poor, and something in his eyes made me think about that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a battle worth fighting. So I turned around and walked out, the weight of the decision sitting heavily on my shoulders. Leaving that mall that day felt very different. It wasn't just the weirdness of the stores or the shock of seeing those symbols so casually displayed. It was just the emptiness, the silence of the place. Walking past what used to be my favorite toy store, now just an empty space filled with shadows and memories, drove home the reality of the situation. This small, once-a-bustling hub of activity and joy was now nothing more than a hollowed-out husk, a reminder of what used to be. That visit was my creepiest dead mall experience by far. It wasn't just the decline of a once great shopping center that got to me. It was the realization that even in these forgotten places, shadows of the past linger, some of them darker than others. Between the unfriendliness of the shopkeepers, their bizarre collections, and the undeniable sense of loss that permeated the air. It was a day I'll never forget. It was a stark reminder that places carry memories, and sometimes these memories are better left undisturbed. Working retail has its fair share of mundane moments. But there's this one night that still gives me the creeps whenever I think about it. It was nearing close and I was stationed at the computer by the front registers, catching up on some work emails. From where I was sitting, I had a pretty good view of the whole store, except for one small part of one corner that was hidden behind a mirror column. Thirst started to kick in, so I decided to head to the fountain in the back of the store, near the restroom and stockroom, for a quick drink. On my way there, passing by the dress shirt wall, I spotted a large man browsing our selection. He was hard to miss really, standing between 6'3" and 6'5", and easily 300 pounds. He had on a red plaid dress shirt, blue jeans and a black belt, with black hair and a noticeable bald spot at the back. Looked to be in his 40s, but I didn't catch his face since he was turned towards the wall. It struck me as odd because I hadn't noticed him enter, and I'd been at the front for quite a while. I mentally shrugged it off, thinking, I'll just apologize to him for not greeting him sooner, and see if he needs any help finding anything after I grab a drink. The walk to the fountain and back couldn't have taken more than 10 seconds, but when I returned, the man was gone, completely vanished. I even checked the fitting rooms and stockroom, thinking maybe he had just slipped in there, but there was no sign of him. Now, here's the thing that really gets me. Our store had this door chime that would go off every time someone opened the door. And when I say this chime was loud, I mean obnoxiously loud. So loud, in fact, that employees from the store next door would often complain about it. Yet, somehow this large man managed to come into the store and leave the store without triggering that door chime. Not a peep from it. To this day, I can't wrap my head around how he did it. Did I just imagine him there? No, I remember him so clearly. It's one of those experiences that just sticks with you. A reminder that some things just happen, and they can't be explained. Every now and then when I'm closing up for the night, I find myself glancing over to the dress shirt wall, half expecting to see him there again, browsing in silence. But he's never there. Just the memory of him and the sound of a door chime that never rang.